Well, we thought we would actually do a accomplishments recap of 2023. So we've been doing some of these videos, kind of more conversational style, that we did like last year and the first year that we got here, but now we've hit year 3, which is pretty amazing. And we have our first renovation that we have accomplished, which is a big deal.
Finally got something to show for it.
It actually feels, I mean, things are getting done obviously through the time, but it doesn't feel like it was done because it was always a work in progress essentially.
Yeah, you're working on something for so long. And I used to work more on smaller projects that would be done in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. So when you work on a project that like goes for a year and a half, you're just kind of losing track of time and like wondering if it will ever get completed.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, one of the biggest issues, like on a project for 2 weeks, I could go really hard on it and it will get done. But if you do that on like a year and a half, you go really fast on something and you just get really tired. And now you need to take a huge break in the middle of the whole project. So It's like a different tempo.
Yeah, and I think another thing that we did over the course of the last like 2.5 years is that we were really working on multiple projects at once. So we had a lot of irons in the fire, but nothing to show for it.
Yeah, that's very dangerous too.
Yeah.
Trying to crack open too many projects. And then all of a sudden you're like halfway through each of them.
Yeah.
And you got nothing really to...
But I think a lot of people have been commending you on your carpentry skills. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's cool. I don't know.
Yeah.
I like to... My biggest critic will always be me, so...
I mean, there's a lot of folks out there who will like slap things together and be fine with it. But I think one of the things that Sonder and I also appreciate is that just craftsmanship, and that means craftsmanship not just from like our own hands, but also from people who work with us. And I think what we really appreciate the craftsmanship, and I think our style is more now we like to do things that well, even if it takes us a longer period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I have this thing, it's not worth doing it if you're not gonna go make it beautiful and like make it the best you can make it. Like it's not worth putting in a deck on a house if it's not gonna last the longest it can last.
Yeah.
And if it's not beautiful, because then who's gonna take care of it eventually? If it's not beautiful or if it's not well built, like the reason why we are just swapping out deck boards on the house up there is because the structure was well built. Mm-hmm. So here, 30 years later, someone is here taking care of that because there was already something built that was good. And now we're just making it even better.
Yeah, and I think one of the philosophies that are trying to adhere to here is, we're getting this at a stage of our life, like we're in our, 30s and whatnot, and it's just really nice to be able to say, okay, well, if we put this roof on, we won't have to deal with this roof for the extent of our life at least. That roof is going to last for 50, 60, 70, 80 years. That deck will hopefully last for like 50 years, for example. So choosing those, making those design decisions up front and just having to do it now, I think will better serve us in the future when maybe we're like too tired or too old to want to deal with them. So anyway, yeah, that was their biggest accomplishment. Is the house that we're sitting in now is the Meadow House. And for those who are just tuning in, this used to be an old nursery office, 600 square feet. And even though 600 square feet doesn't seem like a lot, there was just quite a lot of details and a lot of love that we put into this space. And I think that we have really benefited from it, because before, in this lower area of the land, we really didn't want to spend a lot of time here. And just because it was like, it kind of felt old and decrepit and not usable, not functional, not beautiful. And now with this Meadow House, I think it made a huge difference that we've actually completed it. We've been spending some time down here. We're making some tweaks, but for the most part, it's like complete. And you did a great job, because you really saw this whole renovation through and helped with a lot of the design actualization of like photoshopping things and making sure that we were picking the right colors and all that other kind of stuff. I mean, there's some things that we got tripped up on. Initially with the wainscoting, we thought we'd do like this creamy white color. We didn't really like it. And I think that it served us really well to actually Photoshop things in advance so that we weren't purchasing things that we had to like toss away at the end or didn't use.
Yeah. I mean, that's the benefit we have over a lot of other people, right? We come into this with our graphic design skills and video skills, and we can tweak images to make it look like it's finished and get a sneak peek of what it will look like in the future.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming it's only going to get easier when AI like really starts to take a hold of these creative programs.
Oh, I'm sure.
Where you're able to just type in, make my chimney 2 feet taller.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You're like, oh,
Well, you kind
that's what that will look like.
Yeah, I mean, but you have to see, like, even with the Fusion 360, it's so much easier for you to actually use that program and say 2 feet taller, and then automatically see what it does too. So it has to be so much more functional than that. But yeah,
well, it might
right.
get there at some point.
Yeah, so
That's a benefit.
we started the demo in, I think, mid-February, and we really started building in May, and then we finished in November 2023. So that'll give you an idea. And this was a really good building for us to sink our teeth into. We did a lot of the landscaping around. We're not finished with the landscaping. That's probably another project that we want to accomplish maybe in 2024 or 2025. So that gives you an idea of how long it actually took us to do this. The other thing that we did, that Sonder did, and that was another big learning experience and probably not the best job that you really enjoyed, and we haven't really featured it here on the channel, is the new roof on the common house.
Yeah. The reason, we wanted to renovate the common house first, but then we have no building experience, so we wanted to start on something small first. So during the construction of this, or during the renovation of this, we started on the exterior of the building up there because the exterior needed a lot of work. And if that got delayed too much, the weather would just damage it even more than it was already damaged. So we did a lot of work up there.
The windows and the doors first,
Yeah.
but that wasn't last year. That was
the roof is definitely,
Yeah.
well, I wonder, I'm almost done with the deck, and I wonder what's going to be more. The roof is probably more brutal than the deck. The
Yeah, I
deck
think
is a
so.
lot of work. My knees are absolutely shot.
Yeah.
But the roof is a different story because the roof is like a deck that is like on an angle.
On a pitch.
And in the beating hot sun.
Yeah, and it's a
And-
black roof.
And it's got tar paper on it. So once
Yeah.
that gets hot, you're sitting in one spot for a bit and you're just glued to the surface of the deck.
One thing we will say about the benefit of actually doing the windows and the roof is that we're really looking at the energy efficiency of all the homes, but including that one. And that one has all these really beautiful vaulted ceilings with these wood slats, I guess. They're not slats, but you can't access the roof or the
Well, you
insulation
have
through
to
the
take
ceiling.
each individual board off the
Yeah,
ceiling.
you have to take all the boards off. So what was
Yeah.
really good by deciding to do the roof on the common house is that he could access the insulation, and you found areas that were not really well insulated.
Yeah, so the problem with the house were that it wasn't that energy efficient because the previous owners, they would use this as a summer house. The house originally is a design that's from California, and it's all cedar, which is not really a wood that grows here. And it's really flat pitched roof. It's a 412, which is any flatter than that, it wouldn't really work in this area. The problem is that this house was built in 1991, which is not that old, but it still didn't really have a lot of the modern day features to be able to be very energy efficient. So we were spending a lot of money on heating, and we wanted to find a way to reduce that. And since there were so many windows in that building, the first thing that we did was swap out the windows to more energy efficient windows, triple pane. And then we
Tilt and turn, so it really locks.
Yeah, it's the European kind of window.
But made in the USA, actually. We found Alpen windows.
Yeah,
which,
some of the technology is making it over here.
Yep.
And we went with Alpen windows. They're out of Colorado and works great so far.
Yeah.
And it has locks, not in the middle, but also on the top and the bottom. So when you lock the window, it really squeezes that window tight to
Yeah.
the weather seal, which makes
Airtight
an
seal.
airtight seal.
And you
then-
could tell the difference because we did like a fiberglass vinyl down here, which is very different, and they're not triple pane, they're double pane.
Yeah, these windows here.
These windows in
These
the
are
Meadow
Marvin
House.
windows,
Yeah.
the Essential collection.
Yeah.
So for both companies, we went with like kind of the lower tier fiberglass / plastic
Yeah.
version of it. So that was a huge thing. I think our windows are, they have a rating of U18, U17, 0.17. and that's like equivalent to an R7 or R8. And usually these windows would be an R3. So you can imagine if your walls are like R20, this is resistance value of like how resistant is the wall to like heat transfer. Then if you think about R3, it's nothing. And if your windows are like 5 by 5 feet, then you could insulate your walls, but it doesn't make any sense because you have basically your windows and doors are open.
You're heating the outdoors
Yeah.
anyway with like
Plus there was like air leaks and the windows were about to be done because the seals were broken. There was condensation within the 2 panes. So we swapped those out. And then the second biggest leak in the house was our ceiling, because our ceiling was basically made up of little tiny pieces of wood with a gap in between everywhere. So hot air would just you would create this stack effect because all the hot air in the house would rise up, push up against the ceiling, and then find its way through the little cracks between the wood, find its way through the outlets for the ceiling light boxes, and it would find its way out. And basically then it would heat up the bottom of the insulation and eventually kind of seep through and then heat the roof.
and we'd have ice dams in the winter.
We would have ice dams
Yeah.
because as the snow was the snow was sitting on the roof was getting hot, so the snow would melt, but then it would get close to the edge of the building when there was no hot roof, so it would freeze again. So you'd have this buildup of ice on the edge, and it just wasn't good.
Yeah. So for anybody who has ice
Yeah.
dams on your house, that's kind of like a good acknowledgement of like what might actually be happening, and then you probably have some of the heat seeping out from your room up through your ceiling.
So once we did the roof, that's the opportunity to get in there and actually air seal it better. So what we did is we used, there was like a little pocket of space that's 1 inch thick, and what I basically did is dropped a piece of foam in there and then taped it to the sides of the wood so that no air can get out. Plus it's an extra R5 insulation or R4 for that foam. And then, so the hot air is not able to get out. And I think our heating is doing less work up there right now. I think that ceiling really made a big difference.
Well, one of the ways that we'll find out is that we'll see like what our bill is at the end of the year, at the end
that
of
would
the
be
day.
right now it's too early to tell because there's still quite a lot of holes in the building. But so then now that the house is more airtight, now you're getting another issue where you're not getting enough fresh air getting into the building. Because before, if you have a leaky home, air would get through the windows and, or at the edges of the window or wherever there would be a gap in the walls. And now that we've closed all that off, it's kind of an insulated box. So what we're going to install now is an ERV, which brings fresh air into the house and gets rid of the stale air that's coming out of the building.
That's like, we're not going to finish that before the end of this year, but that ends up being a 2024 project. But related to the windows and the roof, one of the things that we did do in 2023 is replace our skylights, and that was another issue. We even attempted to try to block the skylights out to see if we should just take the skylights out, because immediately, like again, as Sander was saying, that glass doesn't have like a high R value, and so you lose heat that way. But when we blocked off the skylights, we're like, nah, the sun coming down is perfect in those areas.
There's a couple things that skylights and chimneys are terrible for, for making your house energy efficient. A ceiling has like R40 in it at least, and if you reduce that down to like a window, now you got like, again, R3 versus R40. That's quite a big difference. And the heat wants to go up. So like it really pushes up against, it puts pressure on that skylight. But we blocked the skylights off. And what we found is that it becomes very dark. Mm-hmm. And it becomes so dark that it's not, you can't even get used to it.
Yeah.
So, and I think the reason is that because the windows on the side of the building are so big.
On the southern side, too.
Yeah, well, it lets so much light into the space from the sides that if you don't compensate with a little bit of light coming from above, you're not going to get the right kind of like
balance of light.
It feels like you're in this like
den. Like
this den. It's really weird because you have these big windows and you think like, oh, that will bring a lot of light in, but then you're kind of working against it with not having the light from the top. Whereas in this house, all the windows are like normal size.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel dark in here. And we don't have skylights. It's a
Yeah.
lower ceiling. So
Yeah.
it's really just how you perceive, light. So
Yeah, so that was a big thing. We tried to find skylights that had that were similar to our windows, which would be like triple pane or really high R value, but there was not much out there, really.
no. And the only option I found was a skylight that was like $4,000 a piece.
Oh
That's
yeah, very
a lot
expensive.
of money for
so
a
just like
skylight.
one little skylight, yeah, it's unbelievable.
So we ended up with, there's two brands that kind of take this. They have Velux, of course.
Yeah.
And then there's another brand out of Eastern Europe, which is
Facro?
Facro.
Facro, yeah.
And I think they make like those ceiling staircases to get up into your attic. And they also make skylights and stuff. And their design looked a lot more modern and
Yeah.
sleek. So we went with those. And they had a better R value on their windows.
What's
so.
going to be really interesting is that the Meadow House definitely feels a much more like cottagey vibe. The house up to the top, the common house, we also might call it the roost because that was some suggestion that folks had, which I kind of like that suggestion. It has a much more modern vibe, even though it has this also kind of ski chalet feel because it is all cedar, but it ends up being like a very, very modern, clean design. So it'll be interesting to see how we actually take a completely different design challenge up there, which we'll be doing more of that in 2024.
It's got sharper angles,
Yeah.
modern, black details. So,
Less frill, for sure.
yeah, and we let the house kind of dictate what it wants to be versus trying to put too much of a,
Yeah, force it
a
into a...
style on it. So
The other thing that's related to the skylights and the roof is that we had the gutters replaced. And we ended up, spending a little bit more coin up there on copper gutters, but we think it looks really good and really refined. So
yeah, because the house is brown, the roof is black, the copper gutters really give a good accent to that. It's a really beautiful color. And as it patinas, it goes to kind of this green color. And then eventually it will become more bronze looking.
Yeah,
and
we
the
have-
bronze is all these three colors, they match the siding and the roof perfectly.
Yeah, and
So it's a great fit.
we also have some of the landscaping, like some of the planter boxes and some of the landscape edging that we have yet to put in. That's a 2024 project, is Corten steel. So it kind of gives this nice rusty color, and that rust kind of picks up, and some of the brown is a warm brown on the house, like a really nice warm chocolate brown. And then a deck, which Sonder intimated, is that we actually have redone the deck. You're still doing the deck, but it's almost finished. And that also has a nice, really beautiful rusty color that I think pulls
Yeah.
in with the Corten steel and the copper as well. But the deck was a big deal because that was in dire need of change.
Yeah, so those boards were just pressure treated, and they were probably on there for 30 years, or maybe even less long, because they renovated the deck. They added on to the deck, I think maybe 10 to 15 years ago.
Right.
So they
might
could have
been-
redone the whole deck with
Could
new
have, yeah.
boards, but so it's either 30 years old or 15 years old. But they were shot. If I left them on there for longer, they would have started to really
Yeah.
rot, and you would fall through them.
I mean, one of the things is with the deck, because it's on a horizontal surface, they get a lot of, precipitation and sun and everything along those lines. Like even with the house, I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, we replaced the southern side of the
Yes.
house because that gets a ton of sun.
The siding was absolutely
siding was
fried
shot on
and
that
cupped
side.
because you can imagine that the cedar boards, they're exposed to so much UV light that they're almost starting to like bend because one side gets so hot and the other side is against the house and it doesn't see any of that sun. So it just gets this that's why they always promote an air gap behind your siding so that the air can kind of keep the board straight. But it was completely, and there were so many windows in that wall that by that time you can't really remove the windows and save the siding. It's
Yeah.
like you have to rip it out.
Yeah. So that was, this probably gives you a sense that, when you buy a house, some people probably live in a house that's, I know my mom lives in a house that's probably like 200 years old or whatever. But once you hit that 30-year mark with a lot of whether it's asphalt shingles or whether it's siding, whether it's deck boards, it starts to get really tired, and you realize like even the windows like were shot, as Sandra was saying. It was that time like we inherited a lot of things that needed to be essentially changed out.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we're doing.
You know, you could probably squeeze a couple more years out of it, but it's gonna go at some point.
Yeah.
And the same for the siding. Like we had to paint over everything because the siding they used to be stained, but a stain doesn't last that long, especially on the south side of a house. So you have to restain the house every 2 to 3 years potentially, or maybe 5. I don't know. It's like it really depends on the stain. We tested some stains on our deck, and they are starting to go now, and they were put on 2 to 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So, you know, it kind of tells you how long that lasts. So
And a transparent stain will last less long
that's
than
true
like
too. So if you wanted to see some of that wood grain, then you know you're gonna end up doing a lot more work. So you have to be prepared for that. But we ended up just painting over it because we couldn't figure out how to get the old stain layers off the wood and get the wood back to normal without completely sanding the entire house, which would have taken forever. So we just painted over it, and it looks great. You still see some of the wood texture coming through just because it's aged. The wood has some more depth and character to it.
And that makes it look nice. I mean, I think it's still really beautifully done, even though it's not like you can't tell whether it's like cedar or not any longer. But I think it looks still beautiful, and I like the modern look. Like it's hard to look at images before and after now because you're like, wow, the before looked really beat up, but I don't think we recognized it when we initially saw it.
And you get used to it too.
You get used to
right?
it, yeah.
You kind of get used to like how certain things look,
Yeah.
and then at some point you don't really think about it.
One of the other things that we did getting off the house is, well, maybe we could continue with the house. You started to demo the lower floor of the common house and the mudroom. I was shocked when I came back because, I mean, you were the demoing of the downstairs.
Demo goes
had
fast.
happened.
It's rebuilding that takes a long time.
Yeah, exactly. But I just came back after 2 weeks and he had demoed the mudroom. And he sent me a picture initially and I was like, oh, that's down in the basement, isn't it? I come in and I wasn't expecting the whole mudroom to be taken out, which I don't think it was a mudroom at first. I think it was like a little office space in there that they used, but we used it as a mudroom. I mean, that place did get really muddy. But we're going to be doing a lot of the renovations in 2024 and probably 2025, considering like now that we have a realistic approach and time frame of how long this took down in the Meadow House. Yeah, moving on. You built the composter, actually. That was like a cool project.
Yeah, that was a little project in between.
Like
took me 3 to 4 days.
Yeah, I was going to say 2 to 3 days.
And yeah, that was great. I had some wood that I ordered for the wood shop. Ended up using that wood instead of using it in the wood shop. I ended up to build that planter because it was just perfect wood to use.
Right, but we had some ash left over that we got from our land.
And we got some ash from our land that we used in it too. So there was just like, it was a great way to get rid of scraps, a great way to build a composter that we could use for a long time. So we don't have to just throw it on a pile outside and let it just kind of build up and become gunky.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We still need to roll it out. Like we want to have it outside, but right now it's like temporarily in our barn. But we just
need to
have
finish it too, protect it from the elements. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's gonna get.
And the reason why we still have it in the barn is because we plan to do some more renovation in the common house, and we don't want it to be in the way because it is quite big. What we didn't get done, and I think we wanted to try to get it done in 2023, but we didn't, is the residing of the barn. That still needs to be done.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, it sucks.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But hey, the wood will be really dry by the time we get to it.
Yeah, by the time we actually have to stain it.
Yeah.
And then, so we have
Well, why did that not get done?
Well, we had to finish the Meadow House.
We had so much else to do, and I think
Yeah.
one thing that tripped us up is not having a clear design for how we want it to look. And also realizing that one of the sides of the boards ideally gets flattened and planed. Yes.
Yeah.
And we should have gotten that done by the sawmill.
Yeah.
But they didn't have that feature.
Yeah.
So we have to do it ourselves, or we have to like haul all that wood somewhere else. So we'll probably do that ourselves. And then we need to figure out what stain and what color. And it just kind of, every time you want to focus on it, other things start to become our priority, and you kind of just push it to the side.
Yeah, well then you see how far along you're coming with the like for instance, the Meadow House, and you don't want to get distracted again. And it just is another project.
Yeah, I've become more and more singly focused on projects versus trying to do 6 of them at the same time.
Yeah.
So right now, it's about the deck. And we're going to get that to a certain point where the deck is complete. And then we'll crack open something else and work on that for a while. Because if there's too many things going on at the same time, it just never gets finished. And even though it feels like you're doing a lot of things, it doesn't really progress.
Related to that, your workshop, you still have to do a lot within your workshop, but it's usable.
It's functional. I can use it.
Yeah,
it's heated.
It's just unfinished, but he got a lot done there. But again, it means that you have to be singularly focused on the design. You're working through the design of your workshop now.
Yeah, and the reason why some of that work will probably be starting as well as we're renovating the common house is that there's a lot of techniques in there. For example, the way the concrete floor will be treated that are kind of like a test case for what we want to do up in the common house.
Right, so he could test.
So I can test it on a smaller area. If it's not that great, who cares? It's a wood shop.
Yeah.
And or I could redo it. But you know, if I start that on the main house up there, you kind of want to make sure that you know what you're doing and get some practice with it before that. So it's a great opportunity to like kind of test these things out before. So that's might be the only reason why I'm doing multiple projects at the same time.
So that's like the big, what have you on the 2023 renovations. That was like our main accomplishments, and I think that we want to try to get to do more, but like we said, time and energy has other plans, and then seasons seasons also dictate what you can do. And my work is pretty much done in the landscape more or less because it's now winter. But some of the things that we were able to do in the landscape and hardscaping realm is that stone pathway in and around the front gardens. And what was interesting about that is I actually ended up taking out some of those paver stones that we removed, and we've put on a pallet somewhere now. Maybe we'll recycle them into the landscape elsewhere. But I started that, I think, in September of 2022. And basically the hardscaping got done in 2023, like late 2023. So I think maybe September, October is when it actually
those
got
big
finished.
Stones, they sat on our driveway for a very long
For
time.
at least a year and a half.
And that's a hard project because you have to prepare the base really well. Then you have to put crushed gravel on it. Right?
Yeah, crush and run.
Crush and run.
Yeah.
Tamp it down really well so it doesn't sink in. And then you have to lay those giant stones, which you could barely lift on your own. So like, how do you go? It's like this project that you want to tackle, but you can't lift.
And we did hire,
what do you
we
do?
did hire some help for that one. And Dave O'Brien and O'Brien Masonry helped with the big stones. They actually worked on the gazebo that we did last year. And they do such a phenomenal job, but they're so busy that you can only work with their schedule. It's not like you ask them to come out in the springtime and they could actually do it. No, they have like 15 other projects that they're working on. So we're really grateful for them because having a really nice walk path around those gardens really defines the gardens. And what we also like about it is that it snowed already. And because the stones are heated up, like they basically heat up and the snow is not even there. So it provides like a really nice walk path even during the cold weather.
Yeah, the stones are so thick, it holds a lot of the heat.
Yeah.
If the sun gets to it.
So we did expand on what we were calling the yellow garden. So we have all these little pocket gardens, I guess you would call them, in and around the common house or the roost. And we're starting to really try to take little sections at a time. And the way that we're thinking about the landscaping is that we have these individual projects, but these individual gardens or projects really will start to meld the landscape together. Because one of the things I think we recognized when we were first on this land is that it felt really like they had isolated sections, like nothing felt really connected. So I think landscaping really gives us an opportunity to really connect the spaces together. So we have this like yellow garden that we expanded upon. And this was also the second year of the meadow. And I spent quite a lot of time cutting it down with a not a hedge trimmer, but a string trimmer, which was a lot of work. It was 9 acres. And we started to research some ways that maybe we could cut it more efficiently without having to buy a tractor next year. So we're going to have to be prepped for that, because I do not want to do a string trim of 9
Yeah,
acres.
because ideally
again.
you want to cut that at the base and let the whole grass drop. You don't
Yes.
want to like pulverize it as some
No.
tractors do with like the rotary cutter.
Yeah.
So it takes a special kind of cutter, like a sickle bar thing.
Yeah,
or
sickle bar
whatever.
mower, I think
Yeah.
it's called.
So we got to find a way to use that.
So we're
And
going
then-
to try that. We're going to trial some things. But it was really cool to see the meadow come in, because there's certain areas that are pretty weedy that will need to be managed, but that's becoming like a project starting in 2024 for us. We planted a garden in our raised stone bed, and I think that there's a couple things that came to mind with that. Is that, well, it was really nice to go out and to have like a bunch of fresh lettuce and like beets and things along those lines, our parsley, our basil. We made some nice basil pesto. I learned very quickly what are the things that animals like to eat. And so with
like
what
you didn't know that.
well, actually, what I was surprised about is that they actually didn't like the arugula, which shocked me. I guess it's maybe a little bit too spicy. And they didn't like the red sorrel, which is like this type of lettuce with red veins in. So I thought that was, they didn't even touch that. They didn't eat the celeriac until later. And even the celery, they would eat some of it, but they would leave some. So I'm like, oh, that's okay. The oyster leaf, they didn't touch. The basil, they initially ate, and then I think they were like, ugh. And so I was able to leave the basil out, but the lettuce, obviously, they loved. So I ended up taking these cloches, these wire cloches, and putting them over that. And that saved us with the opportunity of having lettuce. But I don't feel like we utilized that community garden space very much, because I'm only here half time. You would rarely ever go out there to pick your own lettuce or anything, even though I
don't know what to
encouraged you.
pick. I'll be eating a I'll be eating I don't even know what a freaking plant is. Anyways, I'll be eating a snake plant, and then I'll be like, oh, my salad's a little weird today. Oh, picking the wrong leaf.
Oh no! All right, so we'll have to do some tutorials there for the rest of
Well,
our
what about
crew.
name tags or something? Man?
Yeah, we had name tags there,
yeah?
but yeah, you
Well,
didn't take the you didn't
Again,
make the
I
effort.
still the names. I wouldn't. Really.
Well, anyway, we're getting there. We're
maybe
getting
just
there slowly.
a color dot. Eat this. This is edible.
You got to see what's already eaten, and then you're like, oh yeah, the chipmunk likes that, so I must like it too. We planted raised beds at the meadow house, so like these areas around here, we continued to plant up, and then you made the meadow house raised beds outside on the patio. We poured the patio, of course, but that was part of finishing the meadow house. But we were able to plant those up, which is great, because next year, hopefully, we'll have a nice perennial carpet in there, and maybe our rose and will start to grow up.
And it's very important that when you make a planter, that you put some kind of fabric between the stone drainage and the soil.
I forgot the geotextile between the stone and the potting medium, which Sonder will not let me live down. So
Because now what potentially happens is that soil will potentially mix in with the rocks, and eventually that's sitting right up against the foundation of the house. So we might have to like figure out how to undo that and put the fabric down and put it. So
We'll
I'm
see.
thinking, get a strong vacuum, get the soil out
Here's
of there.
what I did. I put a lot of I did put
You put organic.
I put a lot of like organic matter in there, kind of like a Hugel mound style thing. So, but
It's gonna break down.
people
and-
actually asked us about that with the because some folks asked us in the garden beds, the raised garden beds around the gazebo, why did you put the geotextile material? We had a bunch of it left over from another project that we were doing, and I'm not like totally anti, and I've said this before in one of the videos. I'm not anti-geotextile. I don't like to put it in gardens that are attached to the soil below, but I do see value for it in places where you're maybe like doing tile drainage, or you have a raised garden bed, as Sandra was saying, or even in the gazebo, because eventually that soil will wash down and you don't want it to wash out, and then your base is going to be muddy down below.
Because like around a house, ideally you have rock, because if water rises in rock, it can't really freeze. There's so much open space that it doesn't do any harm. But if you have soil sitting up against it, now that can expand and contract, and it could crack foundations. And
so you could watch the video
roots
of
can
what
grow
I
in
did
it. Anyways.
and maybe you could decide to use your geotextile material. So moving on, we planted the soft landing around one of the trees, which, we'll link to that video if you want to see what a soft landing is. But it's for the bugs. It's for the bugs, the insects. And then we hung up a lot more birdhouses. So that was a fun little project. Yeah. No, we both did. And you know what? I went around and, we have to clean them out, but like there's sticks out of all of them. So they were all getting used. And we didn't have a bad year with mosquitoes and or flies. So I'm wondering if like our birds are really pulling through for us in that pest management. But we'll see. I mean, I think we could still afford to put more birdhouses for the birds. And as you know, the meadow house is just a big birdhouse too.
Yeah, we got a birdhouse here.
Birdhouse in the front, and we have a bird platform in the back. So
yeah, don't worry about the birds. They'll be taken care
We're
of.
hoping for some more wildlife interactions here, as you could tell.
You barely got a place to live. Birds are taken care of.
I know. We don't even have our own bedrooms yet. But you know what? The birds are taken care of. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's pretty much it. That's our 2023 recap of all of what we've did. And, we'll do another video on what we could expect in 2024. But it was a lot, even though we didn't get everything done that we wanted. We just have to feel comfortable with the accomplishments and the rate at what we're going, because we can't move any faster, and we don't want to compromise on quality of work as well, and quality of life. So that's really important to us as well. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all of your support as well, and for all the compliments that Sonder has gotten on his carpentry skills, his budding carpentry skills.
Man.
All right, bye.